The seed stage remains elusive because we can't just rely on a couple or a handful of Malaysian VCs who would write checks for seed, right? This is after angel, right? Because you need...
Okay, so in this video, I'm going to be interviewing Adlin. So he's the managing director of Endeavor. So Endeavor is like an NPO, non-profit organization from New York, and he works for the Malaysian region. And what they basically do is they support entrepreneurs with potential for economic and social impact in their regions with mentorship and community and all that. And he'll mainly explain on, the issues with like the seed round funding in Malaysia. So check it out.
It would be nice if I can have your background, how you ended up working for Endeavor.
So I think let's rewind back. So I've been an entrepreneur since I was 6 years old, selling comic books.
Really?
So in the early 80s or late 80s,
wow,
comic books were a big thing. They're coming back now, but back then it was comic books before video games, because I was an 80s kid, right? So I've always had the bug to be an entrepreneur. So when I came back from my studies, I decided to either go and work for a big consulting firm or do something that I wanted to do, which is huge car fan. In the early 2000s, this big car show in the UK called Top Gear, with Jeremy Clarkson. I mean, it was a huge thing here in most countries really. And I wanted to be in that space because I love cars, and I said, look, I want to be Jeremy Clarkson. So I did a car magazine. I had zero background because I studied politics and economics in Australia. I had zero background in publishing. Went in, feet first, built a small media boutique house with, at the end of it, 4 or 5 magazines and a big events team and a television show in 3 years. So I thought, hey, shit, I can do this. I was 21 years old, right?
Wow.
And then Endeavor, as the question you asked, how did I stumble upon Endeavor? In one of my companies that I did was a tech company in 2015 called Be Malas, which is an on-demand concierge service. You could use our app and ask for anything you want. So we were getting random requests from all the countries we were in. We were in Malaysia, we were in Brunei, no one ever goes there, I don't know why. It's a pretty solid, they can spend. We were in Singapore, we were in Indonesia, we were in the Philippines. And you get random requests. The most random request we had was someone asking for us to find 300 cockroaches. And we're like, is this a joke? I said, no, he's a researcher and he needed the cockroaches to do research. The only problem with that is obviously you have to own the logistics, end-to-end marketing, a call center. It's a huge amount of money to run that startup, and we only raised twice. So being a first-time tech founder, I guess it was more optimism than realism. I was optimistic that the business had legs, but I wasn't realistic in terms of the kind of requirement in terms of capital that we do. But in that journey, I stumbled upon Endeavor. Because Endeavor at that time were selecting startups. Endeavor at 2015 was only 2 years old, and they were trying to look for high impact, fast moving, high growth startup. And we were shortlisted. The pass rate is 3%. In Malaysia, in the past 10 years, we're 10 years this year, literally next month, we've only selected 24 entrepreneurs in 10 years. Despite meeting, at the very least, a couple of thousand entrepreneurs over the past 10 years.
Are you part of Endeavor because, are you do you have any passion about the changing the Malaysian startup ecosystem, or?
Yeah, so that's a given, right? Being a founder, I know exactly what are the problems facing founders, because you don't know what you don't know, and it's a very lonely journey, right? You can only speak to your founders or co-founders, and at the same time, the best advice is from the investors, because you would think they would give you the best advice because they've invested in you. But the truth is, it's very hard to find independent advice that you can find without someone trying to give you, at the very least, something without an ulterior motive. Because you don't know, right? They may have invested in a competitor, they may have skin in the game because, their son or cousin works for you. So it's very hard, right? Endeavor is above that. Whenever someone mentors you, they have to declare if there's any conflicts. And they're doing it primarily because they believe in growing not just the ecosystem, but the entrepreneur themselves. One of our ethos is you have to be mentorable to even go through the process. Because if you're not mentorable, then no point. You're not going to take any advice, right? So I joined Endeavor because of the fact that I knew I was lacking. I may have the foresight in my head, but is it real foresight, or is it just me drinking my own Kool-Aid? So Endeavor gives me the huge, or at the very least, very, very exclusive viewpoint that I can look at so many different entrepreneurs and see what their pain points are, what their success stories are from a personal viewpoint, and at the same time meeting all these investors and speaking to them on a very different tangent, because you're not going to them for money. You're going to have to understand how their thought processes are, why they're investing in these companies, how do I help you invest in more, how do I help you deploy capital. So then all of a sudden, instead of being either on the buy or sell side, I'm the bridge in between.
So you've been an entrepreneur from like 6 years old, and you've been, I guess, seeing like the the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Malaysia. Like, how has it changed, like through these years? Like, is it more thriving? Are there more startups coming up? And do you see the change? Like,
so Malaysia reached its, I guess, inflection point in the time that we were raising money in 2014, 2015. Because in that year alone, I think 10 or 12 startups were raising seed money from all these global VCs. So my VCs were mainly Japanese, which is unheard of today. My seed fund,
Really?
yeah, my seed came from KK Fund. So shout out to Koichi, love you, man. And a super angel, Japanese, named Hiro, right? And then Malaysian seed fund called Fredo. But 70% of the fund came from foreigners, right? As far as I'm concerned, as Malaysian, right? Which is amazing, right? Which means that the Malaysian ecosystem is vibrant enough to attract foreign investors at seed stage. And because I had these amazing Japanese investors at seed stage, my bridge round had DNA. So, I mean, for the ones that don't know DNA, I mean, it's a huge publicly listed company in Japan, and that's what I think is very, very critical, especially if your audiences are mainly going to be Japanese, is because the Japanese investment ethos is you tend to invest with the Japanese, and that's very important. So when you get one Japanese investor in, it's easier for you to get other Japanese investors in. But the problem now is I think that it's a lot harder for at least Malaysians to get foreign investors at seed stage. So the ecosystem was like this before, it was growing. It took a dip for a while, and I think the 2018 crisis sort of made it worse. And then the whole sort of Uber bubble, all these guys were losing money. And then of course the current winter, which is now you're going to show profits or you're not getting any additional capital. So now, what I do see is that we're about to see a resurgence of the Malaysian startup. I think that's going to happen at the very least by no later than the middle of next year. Because you've got a lot of capital being tied up and not being deployed. And VCs need to deploy because they have their investment window, right? A couple of years once they've raised the fund. So while it's been a very, very strong buyer's market for the past couple of years since winter's come, look, in another couple of years, it's about time that it's going to come back to a more equal standing where startups aren't going to ask for, sky-high valuations, and the VCs aren't going to lowball you to something that you can accept. I hope we come to an equilibrium point where everybody wins, right? And this is mainly for Malaysian startups. I don't know about other markets, but I think the winter has hit everybody equally bad in the sense where valuations have been slashed. But at the same time, the companies, unless they're extremely desperate, are just going to say, look, I'm not going to take your money. I'm just going to wait till the market recovers. So no one's really moving. We're in a holding pattern right now.
I see. So you think the number of entrepreneurs are like decreasing because of this, or
no? We have enough entrepreneurs.
Oh, okay.
It's just that the
Just
access to
funding.
early stage funding is not as fluid as it used to be. Malaysia now is a lot better because we have multi-stage investment companies, mainly supported by the government through many different, programs. But the seed stage remains elusive because we can't just rely on a couple or a handful of Malaysian VCs who would write checks for seed, right? This is after angel, right? Because you need that robust ecosystem that has, okay, a Malaysian company will put in a quarter of your or a third of your round, and I've got, say, a South American VC who has presence in Asia who wants to expand, as well as a Japanese or Korean VCs, because Japan and Korea now more so than Japan is investing quite largely into Southeast Asia, right? Over the past couple of years, really.
How many of like the companies moved to Singapore? Like Grab is like a really great example of like moving to Singapore at an early stage. But like, is that common in Malaysia or no?
It's not common, but what happens is when a company reaches a certain size, in terms of not just revenue, but in terms of the fundraising opportunities, the reason why they would naturally look towards moving to, say, Singapore is because of the fact that it is significantly more robust in terms of the investable or investment scene, right? I think the story of Grab has always been a bugbear for Malaysian, entrepreneurs, politicians, everybody really, even the general Malaysians, because of the fact that it's a Malaysian founded startup that became a Singaporean unicorn, right? But it had to have happened because the founders had to look out for the company. As much as they're patriotic, I guess at the end of the day, it's about what's the best chance for me to grow this business to its natural size. I mean, if you are a Latin American company that has received significant amounts of funding from North America, no one's going to question you for moving to North America because that's where you naturally have to go, right? So to me, a startup is a startup. It doesn't matter where you're from. As far as we're concerned, is if a Malaysian startup moves to Singapore, but they have a huge amount of people that they hire in Malaysia, everybody wins, no? You're still creating a huge network effect. I mean, we have to move away from the idea that you're an American startup, you're a European startup, because you want to be a global company.
I heard that from Malaysia, there's certainly a need for like planning ahead to like go overseas from like an early stage. Is that true, or?
We have the addressable market, but we don't address it enough. We address it in pockets of cities rather than the country as a whole. If you take Grab, for example, that's a company that addressed the entire nation because you can get a Grab anywhere in the country. I think it'd be interesting to know what's the contribution for Grab for all these different states in Malaysia, and then see, is it really very much 50% KL? Because if it isn't, then it's supposed to change the mindset of all these founders, because if it's an equal split, maybe slightly above for KL, then why are we not spending more money to expand our businesses in other states before we go to another country? Now, I think we're all in this space of the bubble of, you know, the DoorDashes, the Ubers, the WeWorks of the world, where capital is cheap, you could just burn cash to acquire markets. So why would you acquire smaller markets in Malaysia when you could acquire bigger markets like Jakarta or Bangkok or Manila, right? But when capital is not as easy and not as cheap, why not move towards, at the very least, ramen profitability, right? Before you go to another country, before you raise a bigger round. Wouldn't that be more sustainable? You gotta change your mindset, right?
You think the mindset has been like changing here, or?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
No, because people are moving towards profitability, because the VCs are saying if you're not showing a path to profitability, we're not going to give you a round.
Do you think like the success cases by like Carsum and like Aerodyne, like has it changed the ecosystem?
Yeah.
And like, oh really?
No, but what Malaysia needs to see is liquidity event.
Yeah.
The moment Carsum goes public and is a good and successful IPO, many things happen. One is Malaysia suddenly becomes a focus point again. Oh wow, $1 billion startup went on the public market, quadrupled the valuation, fantastic. That generates a lot of buzz. On the liquidity side is all of a sudden the founders and some of the guys with ESOP will now have excess capital to then reinvest in the ecosystem. So that's what's lacking from Malaysia. We haven't seen a big liquidity event yet. So I mean, let's look at the US 30 years ago, right? If Jeff didn't start Amazon and didn't have some liquidity, they wouldn't have invested in Google. I mean, if you read the stories, it's insane how many companies that Jeff, through Jeff himself, not Amazon, seeded. When liquidity doesn't happen, you're not going to get people like Jeff coming back to invest. You can't just keep relying on government and VCs to seed. You need founders to come in and put in money and also help them to connect the dots.
Have you like? Do you think there's like issues with like connectivity and network here, or no? Like
And the network is great.
Oh, really?
So if you speak to anyone in the region, they'll say, oh, the Malaysian startup ecosystem, for whatever reason, are friends with everybody.
Oh, really?
Even if you're competitors. It is a very weird thing that I never noticed until I went to, I can't remember where it was, one of the countries in Asia. And they said, yeah, we see that. And I think it's unique because Southeast Asia as a whole is very disparate, it's very disconnected, because every single country has its own language, its own customs, its own propensity to be supportive or not towards sort of local brands or founders.
Okay. I see. So, like, what Endeavor's like main role do you think like is like for like you know, to tackle these, I guess, like problems, or like to develop this ecosystem?
So Endeavor's main role is to come in and assist entrepreneurs with the things that they need most: access to capital, access to talent, and access to mentorship, which I think that's the first. Because when I can give you $1 billion, but if you don't know what to do with $1 billion, you're gonna spend it all, you're gonna waste it all, you're gonna close shop. What's important is beyond money is someone who's gone in, done somewhat similar to what you've done, has gone through the rigors and trouble of failing or almost failing, and telling you, hey man, Everett, avoid these 4 things. And if you ever need me to help you on a 5th thing that you don't know, I'm going to be there to help you get through that issue. And that's the value of Endeavor. Every mentor that is Endeavor in anywhere in our countries around the world will do it for the entrepreneur.
Well, thank you so much. I mean,
No, thanks for having
truly
me.
inspired, truly inspirational. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Everett. Let's have lunch.
Okay.